Halloween night? Just another boring square on the calendar for me. While everyone else was out in wild costumes, dancing under fake cobwebs and plastic skeletons,
Knock, knock. Who's there? Your nightmare.
I was stuck in my office, hunched over a dim screen, drowning in code. That night was no different. So when Julian, my coworker, called to say there was a file crash, I didn't even think twice. I was there in a heartbeat, ready to save the day. By the time I fixed it, it was already 1:30 a.m. The streets were silent, almost haunting, with the moon just a distant, chilling eye up above. I was so completely drained that my only thought was to get home, take a long, hot shower, and melt into bed. 15 minutes, that's all I needed. The night air was thick and eerily still as I drove along the empty streets. Just another quiet, late night. But as I passed this old, nearly forgotten bus stop, I saw her. A girl, standing all alone under the weak glow of a flickering streetlight. She looked exactly like Samara from The Ring. Pale skin, dark hair, hanging wet over her face in these messy clumps. She couldn't have been more than 14, and there she was, alone in the dead of night. I pulled over, rolling down my window. "Hey, do you need a ride?" I called out, my voice cutting through the silence. She turned, slowly, still hiding her face under that curtain of hair. I froze for a split second, wondering if she'd think I was some kind of creep and report me. But then she gave a small, hesitant nod. "Thanks," she murmured, sliding into the passenger seat. That's when this awful, rotten smell filled the car, like wet dirt mixed with something spoiled. I tried not to gag, brushing it off as an overly committed Halloween costume. "You really went all out, didn't you?" I chuckled, hoping to break the weird tension. But her skin looked so strange, this unsettling shade of gray, patchy and pale, almost like she'd been underwater for days. The detail was chilling. And then, as we drove over the bridge, she finally spoke, her voice a low, haunted whisper. "It's not a costume." I laughed nervously. "Right. So, what's your name?" "Samara," she replied, her voice flat and unsettling. My eyes stayed fixed on the road, but a prickling unease crawled up my spine. Trying to shake it off, I cleared my throat. Aren't you a little old for trick-or-treating, Samara?" She laughed, a strange, low, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. "I am, but Halloween's my favorite night," she murmured. "Too bad my parents don't let me celebrate it anymore." "Why's that?" I asked, regretting it the second the words left my mouth. "They think I'm sick. I spend most of my time locked up in the attic." Her voice dropped to a whisper, each word settling into the air like an invisible weight. I felt my stomach knotting up. Just then, she slowly turned toward me. Her face came into view in the soft glow of the dashboard lights, and my pulse spiked. Her skin looked wrong, pale, peeling in loose strips, like old, brittle paper hanging off her cheeks. This was no costume. My gaze flicked to her arms, where strips of raw red flesh were painfully exposed, oozing slightly in the dim light. "You want to see a magic trick?" she asked, her lips twisting into a smile that chilled me to my core. I was too stunned to reply before she reached up and, with a slow, deliberate movement, peeled a patch of skin from her face. It came off with a sickening tear, revealing more raw, crimson flesh beneath. I'd never slammed on the brakes so hard in my life. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I yelled, my voice shaking. But she just laughed, louder now, each rasp piercing the air. Her hands went to her neck, her arms, her scalp, tearing off patches of skin. Blood spattered onto her lap as the smell hit me, a thick, rotting odor that filled the car like a suffocating fog. I could hardly breathe, vision blurring as I scrambled for the door handle. I threw myself out of the car, legs wobbling, and started running, my heart pounding wildly in my ears. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. I had no idea how far I went before I saw the lights of a gas station, harsh and bright, like some twisted kind of salvation. I stumbled inside, breathless, words tumbling over each other as I tried to explain to the clerk what had just happened. The police were called, and they arrived quickly, exchanging quiet, unreadable looks as I recounted the story. Their silence, heavy and unsettling, seemed to answer my fear more than any words could. When they escorted me back to my car, it was still there, engine softly idling, but the passenger seat was empty. Instead, an older couple stood by the roadside, their faces lined with worry and something darker. One of the officers spoke to them briefly, then turned to me. "Miss Miller," he said quietly. "This is Mr. and Miss Peterson. Their daughter Mary. She's been missing since last week." I stared at the couple, my mind trying to piece everything together. "Mary, she's not well," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice quivering. "She had a terrible fever years ago. It did something to her skin. The kids at school bullied her mercilessly, and it broke her. She swallowed hard. Mary thinks she's Samara, that girl from The Ring. You know, the one who was drowned in a well because she was weird." I felt all the blood drain from my face. This girl wasn't some ghost. She was real, and worse, everything she said was real. It was twisted and tragic. She saw herself in this dead girl from a horror movie. The cops asked me where I'd last seen her, but I could barely get the words out, my mind flashing back to that sickening sight of her peeling skin and her unsettling laughter. I mumbled something about the bus stop as they drove off. A heavy dread crept over me. What if they didn't find her in time? What if she hurt herself or someone else? Halloween is all about masks and make-believe, but sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and what's a costume. Just as my mind struggled with these dark thoughts, something strange happened. I matched with someone on a dating app. His name was Adam, and his profile showed a charming smile, dark hair, and a touch of mystery. He mentioned he was new in town and looking to make connections, and we hit it off right away, swapping jokes and stories late into the night. "By the way," I messaged, "my uncle throws an incredible Halloween party every year. You should come." Adam replied almost instantly. "Sounds fun. I'll be the guy in the classic sailor costume, white uniform, navy accents, and a simple black mask. Can't wait to meet you in person." It struck me as a little odd that he already had a costume ready, but with Halloween so close, I didn't give it much thought. The night of the party finally arrived, and my uncle's old house was alive with music and laughter, transformed into a haunted mansion with elaborate decoration. I went all out, too, dressed as a 1920s flapper, complete with feathers and pearls, feeling like I'd stepped back in time. As I mingled with friends, I caught sight of Adam across the room. The sailor costume suited him perfectly, and the black mask added an intriguing air. He approached with a confident smile. "Julia, I presume? Guilty as charged. Glad you could make it." We clicked instantly. He had this way of making me feel like we were the only two people in the room, his attention completely focused on me. We danced, laughing and talking in a world of our own. As we moved to the music, he leaned in and said, "I can totally see you as a princess gliding through these halls." I laughed. Actually, I might have done that once or twice. My uncle's Halloween parties are legendary. I'd introduce you to him, but he's been so busy with guests tonight. He just smiled, mysterious and unreadable. "You seem like someone who grew up with grand traditions." I giggled, feeling oddly shy under his gaze. Later, as the party buzzed around us, he suggested we find a quieter spot. He led me to my uncle's old study, a room filled with antique furniture and family heirlooms. The scent of old books and polished wood surrounded us, adding a hushed intimacy to the moment. I hadn't been in here for years. Adam picked up a vintage photo from the mantelpiece. "Is this you?" I peered at the picture. It was me as a child, sitting on the porch of this very house. "It is." I didn't realize my uncle still had this out. He studied the photo, nodding. "Great eye. You've hardly changed." I laughed. "I was a kid." He looked at me, eyes glinting from behind the mask, his expression unreadable. "You're still..." He trailed off, his voice soft. His gaze locked onto mine, and he put a hand on my back, pulling me in slowly, leaning close. But something made me hesitate. I took a small step back, breaking the moment, and quickly changed the subject. "I should probably get back to my friends," I said, laughing it off. We returned to the party, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was unfolding right under the surface. I reached for my phone to check the time, but it was missing from my purse. "That's odd," I murmured. "Everything okay?" Adam asked, his voice smooth and steady. "My phone's gone. I must have left it somewhere." He reached into his pocket and handed it to me. "Found this on your uncle's table." I took it slowly. "Oh, thanks. I didn't even realize I took it out," I said, but a faint doubt lingered. I excused myself. Maybe I just need a drink. Before I could walk away, Adam handed me a glass from a nearby table, not letting me slip away. Here, try this. I hesitated. What is it? Just punch. Promise it'll make you feel better. I sipped cautiously, feeling the warmth of the drink settle in. The room felt strangely warmer, the lights a little too bright. Adam stayed close, his hands gently brushing my elbows. You seem tense, he murmured. I'm fine, I replied, trying to convince myself, though something felt off. As the evening continued, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. His voice, his mannerism, they seemed oddly familiar. I tried to remember if we'd met before, but my thoughts were muddled, like someone had rearranged them. Needing some air, I slipped away, searching for the bathroom. As I walked down a narrow hallway, I noticed a door left slightly ajar, leading into a small storage room. Drawn by curiosity, I stepped inside. Boxes were stacked on the shelves, labeled with family names. One box, in particular, caught my eye. It had my mother's name on it. I opened the box to find old photographs and letters, pieces of family history. Among them was a picture that made my blood run cold. It was my uncle, dressed in the same sailor costume Adam had on tonight. White uniform, navy accents, and the black mask. I stumbled back, memories flooding in. The way Adam knew about my childhood, the familiar gestures, his eerie presence in the study, filled with family heirlooms. Heart pounding, I rushed back to the party, searching the crowd frantically, but I couldn't find him. Spotting my parents, I hurried over. Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you. They looked concerned. What is it, honey? I told them everything, every unsettling detail. Their faces paled, and my father clenched his jaw. Are you sure? I nodded, barely able to keep my voice steady. He knew things, personal things, and the costume. It's his. Without another word, my father went to call the police, while my mother stayed by my side, holding my hand. Minutes later, officers arrived, moving quietly through the guests. They found my uncle in the garage, his expression smug as he was escorted out. He passed me with a sly, unsettling smile. I just wanted to dance with you, Julia. I'll be back for that kiss. A chill settled over me, leaving me shaken. My mother hugged me tightly as the officers took him away. The realization that someone I had trusted had crossed such a line left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it all. How long had he been watching me? And why? One thing was certain. Masks aren't always part of a costume. Sometimes they're there to hide the darkest intention. Halloween was always my favorite. The costumes, the chance to escape reality, the thrill of being someone else for a night. So when my friend Elisa invited me to an exclusive, pirate-themed Halloween party on a private Hawaiian island, I couldn't resist. It was hosted by a wealthy entrepreneur she knew through her job at a luxury travel agency. We arrived just before sunset, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, casting a magical glow over the palm trees and the pristine beach. A grand ship replica was anchored near the shore, serving as the backdrop for the festivities. Lanterns hung from the trees, swaying gently as waves and distant music filled the air. This is incredible, I whispered, feeling anticipation spark inside me as I adjusted my pirate costume. The night had only just begun, and anything seemed possible. The party was alive with people in costume, and I was feeling every bit the pirate captain in my crimson coat and knee-high boots, which perfectly matched Elisa's outfit. As we made our way into the main area, I marveled at the guests' elaborate costumes, some seemingly straight from a movie set. Even the servers, dressed as deckhands, added to the authenticity as they passed out exotic drinks. We each received a glowing, jelly-like sweet that seemed to fit the party's magical atmosphere. Elisa and I joined the crowd, dancing and laughing under the stars. But despite the lively scene, I couldn't shake a slight unease. Maybe it was the way the staff seemed overly attentive, their eyes lingering a little too long. Or perhaps it was the discreet security stationed at every exit. Did you notice the security here? I asked Elisa. It's a high-profile event with wealthy guests, she replied. Makes sense they'd be cautious. I nodded, trying to brush off the feeling, and we continued to enjoy the festivities. After a while, I decided to step away and take in some fresh air. As I wandered toward the quieter side of the beach, I noticed a small group of guests engaged in a hushed conversation. I heard they're planning to move them tonight, one murmured. Are you sure? The schedule was for tomorrow. Change of plans. The boss doesn't want any delays. A voice suddenly interrupted my thoughts, making me jump. "Emma," someone said from behind. I turned to find a man dressed as a ship's officer, his expression unreadable. "The main event is about to start. You're invited to join us," he said, his tone polite but firm. Sure." I followed him back to the main area where Elisa was waiting. "There you are," she said. "They're about to start the treasure hunt." We were handed old-fashioned maps and split into teams, each team tasked with finding hidden clues that would lead to a grand prize. It sounded like fun, but the conversation I'd overheard stayed in the back of my mind. As our group ventured deeper into the dense foliage, the path became increasingly obscure. "Does this seem off to you?" I whispered to Elisa. "You're overthinking it. It's part of the adventure," she replied. Finally, we reached a clearing where an old chest sat beneath a towering tree. One of our teammates eagerly opened it, pulling out a note. "Treasure returned to the ship for the final challenge." Confused, we started heading back, but the path we'd taken had vanished, the trees seeming to close in tighter around us. "That's strange. I'm certain we came this way," I muttered. Our phones had no signal, and an uneasy silence settled over the group. Then a sudden shout made us whirl around. Figures were emerging from the shadows, dressed in plain black attire, their faces obscured by masks. Before we could react, they encircled us, one stepping forward. "Please remain calm," he said. "We require your cooperation." "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded. "Your families have resources," he replied coolly. "They'll pay handsomely for your safe return." "Kidnapping." The word hit like a blow. Elisa's grip tightened around my hand, and without a word, we bolted into the jungle, dodging trees and leaping over roots as footsteps thundered behind us. Heart racing, I spotted a narrow path leading toward the beach. We burst through the trees, stumbling onto the sand, with the ocean stretching endlessly before us. The replica ship loomed in the distance. "The ship," I gasped. "They might have a radio, something we can use to call for help." We sprinted toward it, scrambling up the gangplank, our legs shaking. The deck was eerily quiet, the earlier buzz of laughter and music gone. Elisa urged me toward the captain's quarters, and we searched desperately for any communication equipment. Instead, we found something chilling, a set of files detailing our personal information, photos, backgrounds, and even our family connections. "They've been planning this," Elisa whispered, terror in her eyes. Footsteps echoed from the deck outside. We quickly hid behind a large cabinet just as the door creaked open. Several men entered, rifling through drawers. That's when I noticed it, a flare gun mounted on the wall. I pointed it out to Elisa. "Will we make it out? And what's really going on at this twisted Halloween party?" For more creepy, thrilling tales, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Creep Tales Hub. Don't miss the next part. Things are just getting started. Elisa nodded, her eyes wide with fear, as I reached for the flare gun, praying the shadows concealed our movement. Just as one of the men came closer, I sprang up and fired the flare directly at him. He stumbled back, crashing into his accomplices, creating just enough chaos for us to break free. "Run!" I shouted, and we dashed out of the room. The deck was a frenzy, other guests being herded together, their faces mirroring our terror and confusion. I aimed the flare gun into the night sky and fired, hoping to draw attention from anyone nearby. The flash was blinding, illuminating the entire deck for a split second. Elisa grabbed my arm and pointed toward a lifeboat. "This way." We scrambled to lower it, but the old mechanism groaned painfully, lowering the boat at a crawl. The kidnappers were closing in. With a final, desperate push, the lifeboat finally hit the water. We jumped in, rowing as hard as we could, our arms screaming with the effort. Waves crashed against the boat as we put distance between ourselves and the nightmare behind us. After what felt like an eternity, a distant light caught my eye. A Coast Guard vessel, heading toward us. Relief washed over me as I saw the kidnappers retreat into the shadows, slipping back onto the ship. Hours later, we woke up in a hospital bed, Elisa beside me, pale but safe. As we tried to explain what had happened, the doctors told us that fishermen had found us, unconscious, drifting off the coast. They said the replica ship was an ancient wreck that had belonged to pirates in the 17th century. Authorities checked the island for evidence of a party or other guests, but when they arrived, it was deserted. Only a few traces of a small private gathering were ever found, along with a high concentration of drugs in our system. I suspected the glowing jelly-like sweets had something to do with it. Even now, we'll never know how much was real or hallucinated. But one fact remained chillingly clear. None of the other guests were ever seen again. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Creep Tales Hub for more stories.